the morning. Douglas Carswell is joining me now from the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Douglas, It's great to meet you. Thanks for coming on.
Good morning, Scott. Good morning, Mississippi.
You're obviously not from Mississippi, though, are you?
I'm originally from the UK. Well spotted.
Right.
I've lived here for 4 years, and I love it.
How did you wind up in Mississippi?
I was previously a member of Parliament, and I came into this role about 4 years ago. I believe in freedom and liberty, and I advocate for those here at the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. And we're really excited about what we could see in this legislative session, which could be wonderful.
Yeah, obviously there are some issues that we've been talking about, everything from tax reform and lower income taxes, or even eliminating the state income tax, school choice, some other issues on the table. Where do you see them headed?
Well, this is the really odd thing. Mississippi is overwhelmingly conservative when it comes to how people vote. There is an overwhelming conservative mandate, and yet our legislature seems to struggle to get fairly basic anodyne conservative policy through. And I think this needs to be pointed out. We're a free market think tank that has no allegiance to any party, but we do have allegiance to ideas, to principles, to the idea of freedom and liberty. And, for example, we've just seen a bill passed after 4 or 5 years of struggle to allow adults in Mississippi to buy wine online. Now, I don't think it should take years.
It's a big deal. Well, right, that's a big deal.
In the land of the free and the home of the brave, it barely scraped through. In fact, it was initially defeated in the Senate. So I think we need to address this issue. Why is it that in an overwhelmingly conservative state are we seeing real conservative policies struggling to be passed? I mean, if you can't get a bill that allows people to buy a bottle of Merlot online, what chance is there of the big things, of tax elimination, of school choice? So I think we need
I think it has to do with protecting the muscadine wine industry in the state.
Well, I think that needs to be pointed out then. If it's the case, as you say, that there are vested interests representing those parasitic vested interests rather than the conservative voters, we need to point this out. I mean, there are 4 key reforms in this session that could be transformative, that could put Mississippi on a growth trajectory. The first is income tax elimination. If the governor wants it, the speaker wants it, it would be transformative. The second is public-to-public school choice. All 4 neighbouring states have full school choice. There's a bill to allow public-to-public school choice. Anti-DEI legislation, tackling some of the woke ideology in our public universities, removing some of the red tape in healthcare. There are all these bills, and yet they're struggling to get through. And I think we need to begin to create a narrative as to what it is. Who are the roadblocks to reform? Why are things dying, particularly in the Senate? And why are we constantly told that something died in committee as though it was somehow an accident that it died rather than intentional? I think we need to see accountability. If senators or Senate leadership is killing bills that are conservative, I think we need to gently and dispassionately point this out.
So what is the holdup? Is it the legislators don't want to give up that control that government has over its citizens?
I think it'd be unfair to say all legislators or indeed all senators. I mean, I put it this way. We have a governor who clearly has a vision for Mississippi. Tate Reeves often talks about income tax elimination, making the state more competitive, inward investment, workforce development. Agree with him or disagree with him, he has a vision. So too does the Speaker of the House, Jason White. He clearly has a vision. He made income tax elimination his priority. He is big on school choice and all sorts of other standard conservative things. The problem seems to be the Senate leadership. 2 months into a 3-month session, it's still not clear what their vision for Mississippi is. And yet a lot of the proposals backed by the governor and the speaker have mysteriously died in committee in the Senate. So I think we need to ask, what is the vision for the Senate leadership? Is there a vision at all? And if there isn't a vision, I think we need to have a conversation about that. Because at the moment, the Senate leadership has put a great deal of effort into saying no to things. But that's not good for Mississippi. We need to know, why is the Senate leadership opposing good conservative policy? And it's not as if the House can really negotiate, because it's not even clear what the Senate leadership wants. It just simply seems to say no to any idea that's not its own, and yet not have many ideas of its own.
So you talk about this state, you talk about Mississippi being a conservative state, a Republican state, but it's really only been for the last, 4 or 5 decades. I think Carter was the last Democrat president that won the state. But it does historically lean as part of the Democrat Solid South. Is that part of the holdup? Even though we may be voting for more Republican candidates, there are less conservative ideologies than you may think.
Well, there are certainly some people who, and it's not a criticism, there are certainly some people who perhaps started their careers off as Democrats and in order to have statewide careers are now Republican, and perhaps they haven't absorbed the entirety of conservative free market thought. But I think that would be unfair. I mean, I don't think you should blame history or suggest that it's, opportunism or whatever. It's a good thing, I think, that the Solid South switched starting in the 80s. The question is today, what is it? Where is the vision today from? We have three key state leaders: a governor, a speaker, and a lieutenant governor. It's clear to anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear that the governor and the speaker have a vision. Why are we not getting a vision, and why are we simply getting no from the Senate leadership? And I think if Mississippi is going to prosper and thrive, we need to have a vision for the future. No is not a vision. Saying no to things is not a vision. And perhaps part of the problem is people are too polite in Mississippi. Perhaps it takes an outsider like me to come along and point out that actually the emperor has no clothes. The Senate leadership has no vision, and this is holding the state back.
You don't always get things done when you're polite, as we're seeing with the Trump administration and Elon Musk by their bluntness in taking action. We're talking to Douglas Carswell, Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Go ahead.
Well, this is it. I mean, we've seen Trump in office for a month, and he's clearly used his office to achieve great things. This is the model that every conservative in the country should follow. When you get into positions of power, for goodness sake, use it. And yet we've had a solid Republican, solid conservative statewide supermajority for a number of years in the state, and we're struggling to agree on things like income tax elimination. It's bizarre.
So the state income tax is that seems to me something obvious to abolish, and how many new residents and businesses it could attract to the state. But it's a tough thing to get done. I mean, government does rely on tax revenue to spend money and to follow their programs, but you actually could bring in more revenue if you abolish it and divert the revenue sources to other programs.
Yeah, I mean, you need to do these things carefully. I don't think anyone is saying that you should.
You can't cut it tomorrow.
Yeah, you can't cut it tomorrow.
You got to have a plan. You got to have a plan in place.
Absolutely, and you can do this by creating what are known as triggers. And I think the proposal put forward by Trey Lamar and Speaker White was a pretty good proposal. It's not perfect. There are minor things, but they did it very publicly. They had a tax day. They invited people to come along, and hundreds of people did. I was there. It was really extraordinary. It was a sort of public discussion about tax policy. It was a textbook example of how to do it. Lots of different ideas, lots of different discussions. Trey Lamar went away, came back with I think a pretty good plan. It could be improved on. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty good plan to eliminate the income tax. And it does it in a sensible way. We then saw Trey Lamar and the Speaker propose HB1, the clue being in the title. It was their priority bill for the session. They passed it in early January. We then had weeks of no response from the Senate, and eventually a counter-proposal that seems to me to be about positioning to not eliminate the income tax. And I think at the end of last week we got a proposal from the Senate that sort of take it or leave it. I mean, I'm not sure this really should stand. It's not 6 of one and half a dozen of the other. It's a good conservative income tax elimination policy being countered by a proposal to not eliminate the income tax. I think this needs to be pointed out to your listeners. We seem to have a vacuum where there should be Senate leadership. It's bizarre.
So, and we've got about a minute left in this segment. Hopefully you can stick around for the rest of the show.
Love to.
How does this compare to states that have been successful in eliminating their state income tax?
Look across the river at Arkansas. I mean, Sarah Huckabee Sanders has come in and she's taken the lead on universal school choice. She's taken the lead on tax reduction. We cut our tax down to 4%. They cut theirs down to 3.9%. That tells you everything you need to know. It really matters that you eliminate the income tax. It's key to making our state competitive. So other states are doing it. Alabama is taking the lead on this. Alabama's governor is using their position and their supermajority to give parents universal school choice and to deregulate. We need to understand that we're being held back by this lack of leadership in the Senate here in Mississippi. Prove me wrong. In the next 3 weeks, get on and do some of this stuff. But right now, I see no evidence of conservative leadership in the Senate.
We'll wrap it up with Douglas Carswell, the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Next, it's Mornings with Richard Cross. I'm Scott Sands on SuperTalk Mississippi. Richard Cross is on vacation this week, spring break. My name is Scott Sands. You can find me on X at Scott Sands Media, The Scott Sands Show on Facebook, of course, all of the SuperTalk platforms as well, and supertalk.fm. Douglas Carswell is joining us on SuperTalk Mississippi this morning, the Center for Mississippi Policy. Douglas, I know we could probably spend an entire show talking about something like school choice and taxes, but I wanted to focus in the time we have remaining on how we can get through these hurdles in the Senate leadership. Is it effective for the people of Mississippi, for advocacy groups, to make their voice heard? I mean, would that make a difference, or should it be the lieutenant governor, who, as I understand, is responsible for appointing committee chairs? Maybe he could have a little coup in the state Senate as well, and replace some of the leadership that's stalling out these issues.
Well, I think it requires leadership in the Senate. I think clearly Delbert Hosemann needs to outline in the 3 weeks that he's got left of this session what his position is and where he stands. And this doesn't mean coming on SuperTalk and spending 15 minutes filling it with, small talk conversation, small talk conversation. Set out what it is that he wants to see done to eliminate the income tax. Set out clearly, not by innuendo and hint, but very clearly what public-to-public school choice means for him. Show leadership, because, I mean, for goodness sake, Scott, if you're going to struggle to get your agenda through the Senate as lieutenant governor, you're not really going to be able to get much through as governor. If you want to be governor, you need to set out your vision for the state. And we, 3 weeks left of this session, I think you should invite the lieutenant governor to come and spell out clearly what his vision is. And I think people should ask him what his vision is, because we've yet to hear it, we've yet to see it.
Is there a large enough block in the legislature, the Mississippi Freedom Caucus, perhaps, to threaten leadership to get some of these issues passed?
Well, I think it requires your listeners. I mean, I think they have enormous influence. The political culture in Jackson is perhaps not used to people being called out for not delivering. There's this idea that everyone has to go along to get along. And I think we need to call time on that, and we need to be prepared to, phone up the Senate and to ask the Senate why they're stalling on income tax elimination, why they're not delivering on school choice. And we're starting to see this. I think we're starting to see ordinary citizens, ordinary voters calling up senators. I certainly had a bit of pushback from senators who are slightly indignant that they're, getting clear messages from voters that they want to see these things enacted. But, I don't think we should underestimate, this hasn't been done previously, and if we're prepared to actually phone up our senators and ask them why they're stalling on income tax elimination, why they're holding back on school choice, why they have failed to deliver yet again the ballot initiative restoration, I think it would only take a little bit of pressure, I think, to see some results.
Well, and I believe we're seeing this on both a state level and a national level, the frustration that we as voters are having with our elected leaders failing to get anything done, to do their job. I was talking with the congressman last hour about the continuing resolution before Congress. It's got much of the same spending that the Biden administration had. There's no funding for the wall. There's continued funding for USAID. These are all things that we've said, hey, let's get the wall built. Let's put a stop to a lot of this foreign spending. But yet it's continuing to be passed on the national level, and we're seeing the same thing in Mississippi.
Yeah, and I'm going to cut straight to the chase. I mean, we have a lieutenant governor who certainly wants us to see him as a potential candidate to be governor. Well, I think I think that's a bit of leverage the voters have there. If you want the top job in the state, you owe it to the voters in the state to spell out what your vision is. No to everything that the governor and the speaker are suggesting is not a vision. So I think I think people need to have this conversation. If as lieutenant governor you want to be seen as a statewide leader, well, what is your vision? Where is it?
You gotta let people know, and then you actually have to do it.
Yep.
It's easy sometimes to have a vision and to have a plan, but you've got to be able to move those things forward. And if you're ineffective at doing that, then why should you be promoted to the next job?
I talk as someone who spends all their time rather nerdishly looking at policy. I mean, platitudes are never enough in politics. You need to spell out the policies to deliver on those desires, those open-ended commitments. But people in Mississippi, I think, have voted conservative again and again and again. And there's this great sense that they're finally beginning to see conservative leadership at a federal level. They're finally starting to see people going through all the federal government waste and rooting that out and tackling DEI. And I think there's a sense amongst a lot of conservative voters, well, why aren't we trying to do some of this at a state level? Why is it that when we have a state auditor who tries to tackle waste in government in Mississippi, the Senate tries to pass a bill to block him? What's going on here? I think there's this growing sense that if people want to be seen as conservative leaders of our state, they need more than just posting social media photographs of them hunting duck. They need more than the right bumper sticker. They actually need to pass some laws in the next 3 weeks. TikTok, prove me wrong. Vote on some of these things in the next 3 weeks.
Enjoyed the conversation. It was great to meet you. Douglas Carswell, the Mississippi Center for Public Policy. Find him on X at Douglas Carswell. I'm Scott Sands. Back tomorrow sitting in for Richard Cross. And tomorrow we'll have the State Ag Commissioner on, as well as talk a little bit more about school choice. Have a great Tuesday.